Howdy, readers. I'm Jason, and this is Chapter and Verse. And as you can probably tell, it is time again for another two-shelf tour. And this evening, we are going to be looking at the second and third shelves on our second fiction bookcase. Let's just jump right in, shall we? So the first book I'm going to showcase is this one here. And this, see if we can get a good image of it. This here is Nickel Mountain by John Gardner. Okay. Now, John Gardner it's interesting, right? So, I mean, he was an award-winning American novelist, but he was primarily known, actually, in kind of writerly and academic circles as America's preeminent master's program creative writing instructor for many years. He wrote a very well-respected book on the art and craft of writing fiction, but he was a well-respected novelist in his own right. Nickel Mountain is a novel that I chose in mine and Kelly's book club, The Eclectic Shade Tree, some years ago. And I chose it because I was familiar with Gardner's nonfiction, and not the creative writing nonfiction necessarily, but his literary criticism. He wrote a very slim volume called On Moral Fiction, which I have still yet to read the entire work of, but I've read quite a lot, especially of its first half, kind of dipping in and out here and there, and I have long considered his ideas in that book to be some of the most important ideas about literature that I've ever encountered. And so I was curious in the book club, and in our book club we only read fiction, so I was curious to read one of his novels. And Nickel Mountain sounded fabulous to me, so I will just read the back of it here real quick to you. It says, at the heart of John Gardner's Nickel Mountain is an uncommon love story set in a small Catskill community in the 1950s, when at 42, the obese, gentle, and anxious Henry Soames marries 17-year-old Callie Wells, who is pregnant with the child of a local boy. It is much more than age that defines the gulf between them. The plot turns on tragic events. They might be accidents, or they might be acts of will, involving a cast of rural eccentrics that includes a lonely amputee veteran, a religious hysteric thought by some to be the devil himself, and an itinerant goat lady. Questions of guilt and innocence and even murder are ultimately eclipsed by Henry Soames' quiet discovery of grace. So that is Nickel Mountain. And the thing about this book, the most noteworthy thing about this book, is that it is about real people. The central romance in this novel is so unlike 99.9% of the love stories that you find in books, even in really great literary fiction. It is just a novel about real people in a real place. Quiet people living unassuming lives who come to depend on each other and support each other and treasure each other. It's a book that, frankly, I might consider even more important with every reread as I get older and wiser, hopefully wiser. So that's Nickel Mountain. And the second book I'm going to showcase is actually a book that we own that I haven't read. And I haven't read most of our books. I will just say that there are some people who's like, I've read 90% of the books I own. I've read about 35% of the books that we own. But this is a book that, this is Cloud and Ashes, 3 Winters' Tales by Greer Gilman. Okay. And I don't remember how this came onto my radar. We were living and working in Missoula, Montana. We were working at the bookstore up there. And somehow this book came onto my radar. And so I ordered it in hardcover. And I paid $26 for it. I mean, I had my employee discount too, but I was just intrigued. I just thought it sounded really wonderful. I mean, on the back of the book, there's this long blurb from Margot Lanigan, who I hadn't read at that time, but I have since read her book Tender Morsels, and it's probably one of my favorite books. But this book in particular, and Greer Gilman in general, just seem to be really highly revered by writers of kind of contemporary fairy tales or weird fiction. And so I bought it, and I tried reading it once, and I didn't get far. I got maybe, I don't know, 10 pages into it or something like this, and I just could not kind of, I don't know, find my way into it. I just had a lot of trouble with it. Not with the prose, not with any of the ideas or anything I was encountering. I don't know. It's just like I was on the wrong wavelength for it. This is a book that is published, or was published, by Small Beer Press. Okay, which means that Kelly Link, who is another writer of contemporary fairy tales, who I just absolutely adore. I've read her book Magic for Beginners, and it's one of my favorite books from the last few years that I've read. And so Kelly Link was instrumental in bringing this book out. And so it's another reason why I feel like, damn, I should read this. And I don't know, I feel slightly intimidated by it. So I was wondering if any of you are familiar with Greer Gilman's work, or this book in particular, and if so, what you think. Let me know in the comments section below. So, that is Cloud and Ashes. Alright, let's move down a shelf, shall we? Alright, continuing on. So we are now looking at the third shelf on our second fiction bookcase. And let me get down here closer to the shelf. I think the first thing that I will highlight is this here. And so this, that's difficult to get a good shot of. There we go. So this is The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford by Ron Hansen. This is another novel that I chose in our book club. And this was way back when we were living in Montana. So I initially wanted to choose this book. I can't remember if the film had just come out or if the film was getting ready to come out, but I was intrigued by the movie, either because I had just seen it, and I was lucky enough, I'm one of maybe 12 people in the country lucky enough to see the movie on the big screen, and I consider it quite possibly, if not the best film of the 21st century, the second best film of the 21st century. So I wanted to read the book. And I had read, I think by that time I had read some of Ron Hansen's essays. So I chose it for the book club. And it is absolutely masterful. Ron Hansen does this wonderful thing that very few contemporary writers do. And I call it verbing nouns. Okay, so he takes a noun and he transforms it into a verb. It's really that simple. But what's wonderful about it is that it keeps you on your toes as a reader, intellectually. In fact, there was a study done that Howard Jacobson actually talked about, I believe, in one of his newspaper columns. But there was a study done by some, I don't know if it was a medical school or a university, something like this. But when writers do that, and readers encounter the work of writers who are verbing nouns, it actually creates new synapses in their brains, in the brains of readers. So it's actually developing you as a reader when you read the work of Ron Hansen. More than just encountering a great story told in beautiful prose, it's literally altering your brain when you read Ron Hansen. And anyway, so this is not the copy that I read. Once upon a time, I read a little mass market paperback of it. And then after we moved to Wyoming, we found this in the used bookstore. And if memory serves, first edition right there. But the cool thing about it was that inside, it's the beautiful thing about shopping in used bookstores. Inside, there's this little author photo of a very, very young Ron Hansen. And there's this little kind of funky, I don't even know what you'd call this, right? The Publisher's Weekly Forecast. So this was long before they were putting blurbs on dust jackets in the backs of books. And I don't know, maybe they just included these little things with some of the books that were being published. But anyway, so it's kind of cool. I've encountered literary ephemera inside used copies of books before that maybe you'll see in other videos down the road. But The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford. There's that. And lastly, why don't we look at... Yeah, let's look at this. So this is a much, much more recent book. And it sold well when it was first published. This is The Dogstars by Peter Heller. And for some reason, I haven't really seen this discussed on BookTube. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right places. But this is a book that I suspect those of you who are reading a lot of kind of dystopias or post-apocalyptic fiction, this is a book that you would adore. So it's a post-apocalyptic. It is set in northern Colorado, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I love it so much. We read this in our book club as well. This has kind of become like a book club video, which I wasn't planning on. But that's nice. Anyway, it's set in northern Colorado. And it's about a man who has this little, I don't know, the puddle jumper, biplane, whatever you want to call it. And it's the story of him trying to survive. And a friend of his, a man he was kind of thrust into survival with, and his dog, Jasper. And I will tell you that this novel moved me so much. This was the last novel that I read, I believe, that made me really, really bawl. Not just cry. I mean, I cry every once in a while with a novel. I read a great novel last year by Kent Harif called Benediction that made me cry pretty good. But The Dogstars made me bawl. And if memory serves, it made most of the people in our book club cry. It made my brother cry. The day after I read a specific scene in the book, I tried talking about that scene with my wife, and I couldn't talk about the scene without crying. So anyhow, yeah, if you are interested at all in, just kind of fresh takes on the post-apocalyptic genre, The Dogstars is that's definitely a book you should be seeking out. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys soon, and you'll be seeing me soon. Because right now it's just my thumb. So